For most of film history, archivists trusted that the machinery of cinema held no real secrets. Every vibration, every echo, every stray imperfection etched into a soundtrack could be traced to its source: aging tape, unstable circuitry, the limitations of the era's tools. But that certainty fractured when a string of routine restorations exposed something far more intricate. Beneath the audible layers of several late-century sci-fi films lay faint structures too deliberate for noise, too obscure for artistic intention, and too consistent to dismiss. These structures appeared as subtle fluctuations, pulses buried deep under orchestral beds, patterned hums threaded through ambient textures, data-like bursts flickering beneath musical cues. They were almost invisible, but once detected, impossible to ignore. None appeared in production records. None aligned with the equipment used to record or mix the films, and yet they persisted, repeating across different formats, prints, and decades, as though carried along by the films themselves. Those who examined the anomalies up close described experiences that blurred the line between perception and intrusion. Some felt a tightening in their awareness, as if the frequencies were attempting to tune them. Others reported déjà vu linked not to the visuals, but to the hidden tones underneath. A few claimed the signals behaved like questions transmitted in a language that relied on sensation instead of words. Studios responded predictably: brief statements, technical reassurances, and quiet remasters that scrubbed the frequencies away. But even after their removal, the anomalies left behind a riddle. Were these signals the product of forgotten experiments, accidental captures, or something threading itself through the medium without human intent? Tonight, we examine 15 films that carried these hidden transmissions, brief echoes of something just beyond the boundary of hearing, waiting for anyone willing to notice. 1. 2001. A Space Odyssey, 1968. The Monolith Sub-Band Veil. During a forensic reinspection of 2001, A Space Odyssey's monolith sequences, audio engineers discovered a persistent sub-band veil buried below the audible floor. At casual listening levels, it registered only as atmospheric presence. But when the soundtrack was expanded into ultra-low spectral ranges, a precisely shaped harmonic curtain emerged. The sub-band did not drift, something nearly impossible for analog recordings of the era. Instead, it remained unnervingly stable, as though anchored by an external reference. When isolated, the veil produced sensations that were difficult for technicians to articulate. Some described a momentary widening of perception, like stepping into a space larger than the room they occupied. Others felt a sudden pressure near the temples, or a vertigo-like awareness of vast distance. Under spectrographic inspection, the subband revealed not a simple hum but an intricate harmonic structure with repeating imperfections. Imperfections positioned with such consistency they resembled encoded intervals rather than flawed tape. Kubrick's production logs make no mention of experimental sub-frequency layers. Interviews with sound crew from the period attribute the film's low-frequency power to orchestral design, not hidden tones. Yet whenever engineers attempted to remove the veil, the emotional architecture of the monolith scenes collapsed, the scale and gravity evaporated, leaving the visuals strangely hollow. Collectors with original theatrical prints sometimes report fleeting overtones, drifting in and out of perception during these sequences. Some claim the sound seems to tilt at higher volumes, bending subtly as though reacting to the listener rather than the playback system. In polished remasters, much of the veil has been suppressed, but in early prints, the full phenomenon remains, a resonant, subharmonic curtain draped beneath the monolith's presence. A signal without an identified source, one that feels less like part of the soundtrack and more like something the soundtrack caught by accident. 2. Solaris, 1972. The memory loop resonant field. While rebuilding Solaris's original audio from its fragmented sources, technicians stumbled upon a resonant field that defied classification. Unlike ordinary reverberation, which spreads outward from its source, the resonance in Solaris seemed to loop inward, collapsing its tails into dense pockets of tonal energy. These pockets fluctuated at intervals that mirrored the film's emotional tides, intensifying during scenes of grief, longing, or cognitive disruption. When examined under spectral microscopy, the resonance displayed patterns reminiscent of neural firing clusters, bursts of microharmonics that curved in ways strikingly similar to electrophysiological signatures. There was no technical explanation for such a phenomenon in a 1972 production, and no equipment on record capable of imprinting sound with a structure resembling cognitive processes. Yet the correlation between emotional beats and resonant distortion was unmistakable. Those who listened to the isolated field often reported introspective reactions. Some experienced unexpected memories, while others described a drifting sensation like thoughts momentarily detaching from narrative continuity. A few even claimed the resonance seemed to repeat them, as if mirroring emotional states back at the listener. These accounts were not publicized, but circulated quietly among the restoration team. Attempts to recreate the resonance using analog gear resulted in superficial similarity, but lacked the internal layering that defined the anomaly. It behaved as if multiple reverbs from non-existent spaces were collapsing into one another, impossible given the tools available during production. Modern remasters toned down much of this effect, leaving cleaner but less emotionally charged sequences. Only early prints retain the full resonance field, an acoustic swirl that seems to hold memory, reflect memory, and reshape memory within a single continuous loop. Some technicians concluded that the anomaly was a technical ghost. Others believed it was something far stranger, a form of internal echo emerging from the film's core themes. But no one, even today, can explain how it ended up embedded in the original mix. 3. The Andromeda Strain, 1971, the micropattern breathwave. During a deep spectrum transfer of the Andromeda strain's magnetic reels, archivists encountered an anomaly so subtle it initially resembled tape fatigue. But when they magnified the waveform, the so-called fatigue revealed a recurring micropattern, tiny oscillations rising and collapsing in intervals uncannily similar to respiration. The frequency shifts did not match synthetic drones, environmental hums, or any biological source used during production. Instead, the breath-like pulses appeared to drift in ways that suggested responsiveness, though no one could articulate what they might be responding to. The anomaly manifested most clearly during sequences focused on containment, contamination, or microscopic analysis. In some cases, the pulses tightened into compact, rhythmic clusters, and in others, they stretched into wavering undulations. The variation was too intentional-looking to be mechanical error, yet too irregular to be intentional design. Engineers who isolated the breathwave reported the unsettling sensation of being listened to, as if the sound carried a faint awareness. This perception was dismissed as psychological bias until multiple technicians experienced similar reactions without prior discussion. Attempts to emulate the micropattern with era-accurate equipment produced tonal resemblance, but failed to recreate the drifting pulse intervals. The breath wave behaved like a foreign signal trapped inside the film's auditory machinery. Some speculated it originated from experimental medical devices of the period, but no documentation places such equipment anywhere near the mixing environment. Later, digital remasters inadvertently erased the anomaly, smoothing it into the sterile ambience associated with the film's aesthetic. Yet in untouched archival prints, the breathwave persists, quiet, deliberate, repeating. Whether it is an artifact of unseen contamination or something the soundtrack captured unintentionally, the micropattern remains one of the film's most confounding signatures, a faint, rhythmic presence that feels less like noise and more like something alive trying to inhale. 4. THX 1138197-1. The multiband control hum. During a forensic reconstruction of THX 1138's original audio elements, specialists encountered a multi-band hum layered beneath several sequences set in the subterranean complexes. At first, it sounded like typical industrial ambience ventilation systems, electrical currents, distant machinery. But when technicians filtered the frequencies individually, the hum separated into 3 precisely spaced bands, each oscillating at a slightly different rate. Together, they formed a modulation system that seemed too geometric to result from environmental noise. The hum intensified in scenes that emphasized compliance, observation, or emotional suppression. During moments of rebellion, the bands weakened or slipped out of alignment, only to realign seconds later as if recovering from interference. No production documents reference such an experiment, and the technology available at the time could not have intentionally generated this many synchronized tonal layers without specialized equipment. When isolated for study, the hum produced subtle sensory disruptions. Some listeners felt their thoughts constrict, as though their focus were being involuntarily narrowed. Others reported a momentary distortion in their perception of space, describing the room stretching or shrinking in their peripheral awareness. These effects, though difficult to quantify, paralleled the film's themes with uncanny precision. Attempts to replicate the three-band system using analog synthesizers or test tone generators failed repeatedly. Engineers could match the frequencies but not their coordinated drift, a behavior that hinted at feedback between the bands themselves. Later remasters filtered the hum heavily, erasing most of its underlying structure. Yet on original prints, the multi-band control hum remains intact, a quiet architecture humming beneath the narrative, echoing a system of order and surveillance that seems to exist independently of the film's world. 5. Logan's Run 1976, The Ritual Cycle Harmonic Drift. During a detailed restoration of Logan's Run, audio technicians discovered an unusual harmonic drift embedded within the synthesizer passages that accompany the film's more ceremonial sequences. Unlike standard modulation artifacts, which fluctuate unpredictably, the drift followed a distinct rising and falling contour that repeated throughout the carousel scenes and philosophical conversations. Its structure resembled a ritual cycle, looping subtly as though marking time according to rules external to the film. Spectral scans revealed that the harmonic drift contained micro-shifts arranged in repeating geometric patterns. These shifts were too clean to be mechanical noise, yet too irregular to match intentional musical design. Engineers attempted to trace the anomaly to oscillators or detuned filters, but none of the vintage instruments used in production could have generated patterns of such mathematical weighting. Listeners who monitored the isolated drift frequently reported a mixture of physical and cognitive reactions, a tightening of the jaw, a rush of mild euphoria, or the eerie sensation of déjà vu tied specifically to enclosed, brightly lit spaces. A few noted that the tone felt familiar in a way that doesn't belong to memory, prompting speculation that the drift might mimic certain entrainment frequencies, though no theory gained consensus. Attempts to reproduce the phenomenon using period-accurate equipment produced incomplete results. Engineers could approximate the surface texture, but not the internal logic of the drift. Some suggested the anomaly might have originated from a malfunctioning modulation unit interfering with itself, while others believed an external transmission may have been accidentally recorded. Modern remasters smoothed over most of the drift, removing the uncanny quality that early viewers often cited as part of the film's hypnotic aura. Yet untouched archival prints still contain the full phenomenon, a cyclical hum that feels like an acoustic ritual encoded beneath the narrative, repeating a pattern whose purpose remains unknown. 6. Close Encounters of the Third Kind 1977, The Undersignal Echo Pattern. During an advanced restoration of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, engineers uncovered a faint but highly structured tonal pattern hidden beneath the film's most iconic musical exchanges. The familiar five-tone motif remained untouched, yet below it so deep that only spectral analysis could reveal it. A secondary pattern rippled through the soundscape. This undersignal didn't follow harmonic rules nor mirror any orchestral instrumentation. Instead, it formed a sparse sequence of unevenly spaced tones, almost like an echo attempting to converse with the melody rather than repeat it. Unlike typical audio bleed or environmental resonance, the pattern surfaced only at moments of communication when the narrative itself reached toward contact. The tones lengthened during extended musical dialogues, compressed during tense exchanges, and occasionally vanished entirely when no communicative presence was implied. Engineers found no documentation of any such layer in the scoring sessions, and the pattern did not align with any equipment signatures of the era. Isolating the undersignal produced startling reactions. Some listeners felt their breathing rhythm shift involuntarily. Others sensed an anticipatory pressure, as though awaiting an answer to a question they had not asked. A few described an uncanny emotional tilt, an inner alignment with the scene that felt more physical than psychological. None of these impressions matched conventional psychoacoustic responses. Attempts to reconstruct the pattern using 1972 synthesizers and tape modulation yielded unstable approximations, but never the precise spacing or strange internal cohesion of the original. The anomaly seemed less like a sound effect and more like a signal caught in the film's machinery. Later remasters muted much of this hidden layer, smoothing the film's audio bed into clarity. But early prints still carry the full undersignal echo, an auditory trace that suggests the film wasn't simply portraying communication. Something inside the soundtrack seemed to be participating in it. 7. Alien 1979, the subharmonic tracking beacon. While restoring Alien's original audio, preservationists noticed a repeating subharmonic pattern subtly embedded beneath the ambient drones of the Nostromo. At first, it appeared to be machinery hum, but the longer the team observed it, the clearer its structure became. A deliberate, cyclical beacon tone, slowed to a glacial rhythm and buried far below standard auditory thresholds. Spectral analysis revealed that the pattern cycled with unnerving precision. Every pulse carried a distinct rise and fall contour, too consistent for random vibration. Even more troubling was its behavior across scenes. During sequences where characters wandered isolated corridors, the pulse intensified slightly, as if drawing nearer. In moments of tension, it thinned but preserved its timing perfectly. No mixing record explains its presence. Technicians who isolated the beacon reported sensations ranging from stomach pressure to a sudden narrowing of focus. A few saw flashes of imagery unrelated to the film, dark metallic chambers, cavernous spaces, or the vague impression of mass looming in the dark. Such reactions are impossible to quantify, yet they repeated often enough to earn quiet discussion among the archival team. Attempts to align the beacon with known signals, maritime, aviation, military, yielded only partial matches. Some intervals resembled underwater sonar, while others suggested deep space communication experiments of the era. But none aligned fully with the tone's strange pacing. Later, remasters dulled the beacon, smoothing the low-frequency spectrum until only faint traces remained. Yet original theatrical prints still hum with the full signal, a slow, persistent call embedded in the film's silence. Whether it was an unintended contamination, a forgotten mix element, or something the microphones captured without human awareness, the beacon feels undeniably intentional, as if some presence within Alien was communicating long before the creature itself appeared on screen. 8. The Black Hole 1979, the Event Horizon Frequency Warp. During a multi-channel reconstruction of The Black Hole, engineers detected a peculiar frequency warp embedded within scenes that approached the singularity. Unlike traditional bass effects used to evoke cosmic weight, the warp behaved erratically, bending inwards and then snapping outward in precise oscillations. Its shape resembled a gravitational curve, not metaphorically, but mathematically mirroring theoretical models that only gained scientific traction decades after the film's release. At full isolation, the warp revealed secondary harmonics that rippled along its outer edges. These ripples behaved like interference from some distant vibration, reacting to shifts in the film's pacing with uncanny synchronicity. When tension escalated, the harmonics tightened. When dialogue softened, they drifted apart. The phenomenon suggested an underlying modulation source far beyond any known mixing technique of the 1970 seconds. The engineers who monitored the warp described a suite of physical sensations, a subtle disorientation, an inexplicable heaviness in the limbs, or an internal tilt as though the listener were standing near a force that affected balance more than hearing. Some felt a faint pull in the chest, mimicking the sensation of descending rapidly in an elevator. Attempts to recreate the warp using period-accurate synthesizers and subharmonic generators failed to replicate its peculiar curvature. In every test, the recreated tones lacked the warp's shifting center, a quality that made the signal feel alive as if it were adjusting to something beyond the film itself. When the film underwent digital cleanup, the warp was unintentionally flattened. The remastered version preserved clarity, but technicians quietly admitted something ineffable had vanished. Early prints, however, still hold the untouched frequency warp, an acoustic phenomenon that behaves not like a sound effect, but like an artifact captured from an impossible physics experiment. Its presence raises a question no one has answered. Did the film's soundscape accidentally record a resonance that did not belong to the studio at all? 9. TRON 1982, the subcoded pulse array. During a meticulous audio overhaul of Tron, restorers uncovered an intricate arrangement of pulses woven beneath the film's electronic score. These pulses were barely noticeable at first, soft, staccato flickers masked by synthesizer lines. But spectral magnification revealed that each flicker adhered to a rigid structure, clusters of microbursts arranged with the precision of data packets. The discovery left the team baffled. No technology used in 1982's audio production pipeline could embed such clean, machine-like arrays without leaving a trace in the session notes. More strange was the array's shifting density. In high-intensity sequences like the light cycle arena, the pulses formed thicker, more complex structures, almost as if adapting to the visual chaos. In calmer scenes, the clusters softened, stretching into elongated patterns that suggested a form of rhythmic breathing. Multiple technicians who analyzed the phenomenon commented that the array felt responsive, a term they admitted made little technical sense but matched the behavior they observed. Listeners exposed to the isolated pulse array reported vivid internal visuals, flickering grids, digital corridors, cascading geometries. These experiences occurred even among those unfamiliar with the film's aesthetic, raising questions about whether the pulses interacted with perception in ways beyond simple sound. A few claimed the array produced a brief but potent sense of recognition, like hearing a language they once knew but had forgotten. Attempts to decode the array have produced conflicting interpretations. Some believe the pulses imitate early error correction sequences from primitive computer networks. Others suggest the structures resemble truncated communication tests. None of the theories fit neatly, and none explain how such a signal could have slipped into a soundtrack decades ahead of its time. While later remasters filtered out most of the noise floor, and with it, the array original prints retain the full phenomenon. For those who seek it, the subcoded pulses still flicker across the soundtrack like a ghost network trying to transmit through the film's circuitry long after its intended receivers disappeared. 10. Blade Runner 1982. The Echo Loop Drift. While reconstructing Blade Runner's original soundtrack, archival engineers detected a delicate echo loop embedded beneath Vangelis's atmospheric synthbeds. At first, it sounded like a faint reflection, perhaps a distant room reverb left untrimmed. But deeper inspection revealed an anomaly. Unlike a standard echo, this loop didn't dissolve over time. Instead, it sharpened. Each repetition refined its shape, growing more defined with every cycle, as if the loop were learning from itself. The drift emerged most clearly in scenes involving replicants or artificial memory constructs. Some segments displayed microdelays that formed fractal-like structures under magnification patterns too mathematically precise for analog equipment of the early 1980 seconds. Engineers theorized it might have been the accidental byproduct of layered tape processes, but the symmetry of the drift pushed that idea into doubt. Technicians who listened to the isolated drift reported experiences that bordered on introspective hallucination. Some felt their thoughts tighten, as though the sound were narrowing their internal focus. Others experienced fleeting impressions of neon-lit streets or falling rain imagery uncannily tied to the film's aesthetic, yet heard with no visual accompaniment. These responses persisted even when listeners were unaware which segment contained the anomaly. Attempts to rebuild the drift using analog hardware produced partially convincing tones but lacked the recursive clarity that defined the original loop. Modern digital tools could model the delay pattern, yet none recreated the subtle evolution that made the drift feel alive. Later remasters toned down or removed the anomaly entirely, smoothing the auditory space. Fans of early editions insist the absence changed the film's emotional dimension, stripping away a haunting undertone that once felt inseparable from its world. Yet in the earliest prints, the echo loop drift remains, a quiet, recursive whisper within the soundtrack, behaving less like a sound effect and more like a memory attempting to rewrite itself. 11. The Terminator 1984. The Displacement Resonance Field. During a comprehensive reanalysis of the Terminator's original sound elements, engineers encountered an infrasonic resonance embedded in scenes involving temporal shifts. The resonance wasn't static, it expanded and contracted like a slow, mechanical breath. Under broad-spectrum visualization, the waveform exhibited a curious looping pattern, almost like a compressed echo, folding repeatedly into itself. Its periodicity aligned closely with scenes referencing alternate futures or collapsing timelines, raising speculation that the anomaly might have been intentionally tied to the film's themes. But no technical record supported that idea. When isolated, the resonance generated unusual reactions. Some technicians felt a brief moment of derealization, as if the room had subtly drifted out of alignment. Others described a mental stutter, a short lapse between perception and recognition. A handful reported momentary calm, followed by a spike of unease when the frequency dipped sharply. None of these effects matched typical infrasonic exposure profiles, suggesting the resonance behaved differently from low-frequency hums found in older productions. Reconstruction efforts proved equally strange. Engineers using vintage synthesizers could mimic the resonance's tonal color, but never its elastic motion. The original field stretched and recoiled unpredictably, functioning more like a mechanical organism than a static tone. Some proposed that early mixing boards might have captured a faint external signal without engineers noticing, but the repeatability of the pattern across all prints complicated that explanation. Later remixes smoothed out the infrasonic layer, leaving the modern versions cleaner but lacking the peculiar weight that early viewers remember. Yet preserved theatrical audio still carries the displacement field, a frequency behaving like a tether between moments, compressing time into sound. Whether accident or artifact, the resonance remains one of the film's most unsettling signatures, a vibrating reminder that, in The Terminator, it isn't just characters that travel through time, the soundtrack feels like it does too. 12. Predator 1987. The Cloaking Phase Cascade. During a high-resolution rebuild of Predator's sound stems, restoration engineers discovered an unusual cascade of shifting phases hidden beneath the creature's iconic clicks. At first, the cascade looked like layered ambient interference, random, uneven, easily explained by field recording limitations of the era. But once the team isolated those frequencies, the pattern revealed itself with startling coherence. Each shift appeared in synchronized bands, rising and falling in a rhythm far too controlled to be natural error. The cascade intensified whenever the alien activated its cloaking mechanism on screen. Instead of simply matching the visual effect, the phases seemed to anticipate it, aligning milliseconds before the distortion appeared. No known analog equipment of 1987 could predict cues in real time, and the production logs do not reference any hidden audio experimentation. Some engineers speculated that overlapping field recordings accidentally produced the illusion of pattern, but the math didn't support that theory. The shifts remained identical across multiple international prints. Those who monitored the isolated cascade described distinct psychological reactions. Several felt a sudden sharpening of spatial awareness, as if the sound heightened their alertness. Others sensed a subtle shift behind them, a fleeting impression of presence that vanished the instant they tried to focus on it. One technician described it as a frequency that knows you're listening, an unsettling remark dismissed publicly but echoed privately by others. Attempts to reconstruct the cascade using era-accurate equipment consistently failed. The texture could be imitated, but the predictive timing elements remained impossible to reproduce. A few theorists proposed that an external broadcast might have bled into the recording chain, though no contemporary signal architecture matched the cascade's intricate oscillation. When newer remasters were issued, most of the pattern disappeared under modern filtering. Yet early prints still house the full phenomenon, a phase cascade that seems less like a technical anomaly and more like a sonic footprint belonging to something that was never meant to be fully seen. 13. They Live 1988. The Covert Interval Pulse. During a full spectrum examination of They Live's early audio prints, engineers noticed a soft, rhythmic rise in amplitude hidden deep beneath several broadcast sequences. This pulse was faint, barely distinguishable from background rumble, but its unwavering timing immediately set it apart. Every 4.27 seconds, a small amplitude spike formed a subtle signal crest, perfectly regular in duration and shape. No soundstage equipment from 1988 could have produced such uniformity without deliberate intervention. When charted visually, the pulse resembled a buried carrier wave, something used in covert transmissions or signal piggybacking. Yet the film's soundtrack documentation lists no embedded communication tests, no secondary audio channels, and no experiments involving concealed signaling. The pulse did not appear to correlate with any narrative element, but it did correlate with scenes involving subliminal messaging and controlled perception, lending it a disturbing poetic symmetry. Technicians isolating the pulse reported unusual sensory outcomes. Some experienced a faint metallic pressure near the jawline, others a fluctuating sense of balance. Several noted that certain spoken lines seemed to replay internally moments after the audio had passed, as though the pulse had created a lingering cognitive echo. Although no consistent explanation emerged, the effects were considered too uniform to ignore. Efforts to decode the pulse generated fragmented results. A handful of analysts believed it resembled an incomplete number station rhythm. Others interpreted it as a misaligned military test signal. Nothing matched perfectly, leaving the pulse suspended in ambiguity. In later re-releases, the pulse diminished drastically, likely smoothed out by automated noise filtering. But in untouched theatrical mixes, it still beats a quiet, persistent interval pulse embedded beneath a film about hidden control structures. Its presence raises a final question. Was it an accident cleverly disguised by circumstance, or a signal waiting for someone who knew to listen in the spaces between? 14. Dark City 1998. The reflective harmonic split. While reconstructing Dark City's multi-track stems, a restoration team encountered an ethereal harmonic band drifting along the upper frequencies of several key sequences. Unlike typical tonal bleed or reverb haze, this band behaved as if it were made of two overlapping tones that continuously folded through one another. The resulting shimmer resembled a harmonic split, an acoustic mirroring effect no standard mixing process of the late 1990 seconds could have produced. What drew attention wasn't just the presence of the split, but its uncanny timing. The band strengthened during memory reconstruction scenes, weakened during narrative resets, and nearly vanished during moments of emotional clarity. Its movement suggested intentional design, yet no surviving production documents or interviews mention experiments with dual-phase harmonics. Engineers attempting to isolate the band found that it fragmented unpredictably, as though resisting dissection. Listeners exposed to the isolated signal described disconcerting experiences. Some felt a strange tug of recollection memories surfacing that did not seem to belong to them. Others sensed a temporal displacement, as though the sound were collapsing experiences from two different moments into one. A handful reported the illusion of the room subtly reshaping itself, a fleeting but unforgettable perception. Attempts to reproduce the effect through analog synthesis or digital simulation repeatedly fell short. While technicians could imitate its tone, they could not replicate the self-folding behavior that defined the anomaly. The reflective harmonic split behaved like a loop referencing itself, continually rewriting its own structure. Later remasters softened the anomaly or removed it entirely, toning down the film's unnerving resonance. Yet collectors of early prints insist the original mix felt alive, haunted by a tone that wasn't merely present but seemed aware of the moments it accompanied. Whatever its origin, the harmonic split endures as one of Dark City's most elusive imprints, a sound that behaves like memory trying to remember itself. 15. The Matrix 1999. The encoded low-burst scatter. During a detailed redigitization of the Matrix's theatrical mix, technicians stumbled on a faint scatter of low-frequency bursts buried underneath the film's mechanical thrum. At first, these bursts appeared to be remnants of compression artifacts one might expect from early digital encoding. But under expanded spectral views, the bursts formed a repeating lattice. Each wavelet arrived at an interval too precise for corrupted data, yet too intricate to fit any documented codec from 1999. It was as though a separate digital layer had been threaded inside the soundtrack without any acknowledgement in production files. The bursts manifested most prominently in scenes tied to destabilized perception, the déjà vu moment, the bending hallway, the architectural resets. Their presence aligned so precisely with narrative distortions that engineers began debating whether the signal behaved as a reactive element rather than a passive flaw. Some argued it resembled the output of a split-channel system, something designed to respond to visual triggers. Yet this theory made no sense. No such system existed in commercial film audio at the time. When isolated, the bursts produced strange, subjective effects. Some listeners described a sharpening of focus, others a momentary blackout of peripheral sound. A few said the bursts felt like a prompt, as though the track were waiting for input from an external source. Software attempting to decode or recompile the bursts frequently locked up or returned unreadable hashes resembling fractured glyphs. The remastered editions released years later eliminated nearly all traces of the scatter, leaving a notably smoother bass environment, but also stripping away an intangible tension longtime viewers swore they remembered. Whether a technological glitch, an unintended cross-recording, or something woven into the film by forces beyond design, the encoded low-burst scatter lingers in early mixes, acting like a dormant script embedded beneath the one audiences were meant to see. If the anomalies we uncovered tonight truly threaded themselves through decades of filmmaking, then these broadcasts were never accidents, they were invitations. Each signal whispered beneath the surface, waiting for someone patient enough, curious enough, or reckless enough to listen past the noise. And now that you've heard them, the silence between films may feel a little less empty. If you want to keep tracing these hidden frequencies, return to the archive. There are still echoes we haven't decoded and transmissions that haven't revealed their destination.